Well, thanks for joining us, Teresa. It's been a pleasure already. Teresa was the editor of your Sinclair magazine. You wanted to work in TV originally, didn't you?
Yeah, no, that is true, actually. I wanted to be David Attenborough, but good for him. He's managed to, I wouldn't have got a look in anyway since he's 98 or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wrote to him when I was in my last year of university asking how he got into it. And I got a lovely handwritten letter back from his home address and everything, with his last line in it saying, "I'm sorry to be so useless," because he felt he'd sort of like got into it through his brother Richard.
Hmm. Hmm. So how did you get into journalism then from there?
Well, I applied for a few TV jobs, and then I decided I quite fancied advertising. I knew I wanted to work in something to do with something that was creative in the media side of things. Um, and I got an awful I had a whole fold of rejections from the advertising world. And then I saw a job advertised in magazines, and it was for a company called ECC, which they did a magazine called Sinclair QL Plus. And I think they were an offshoot of EMAP, or they'd sort of broken away, an independent group. Anyway, it was for a kind of trainee sort of journalist writer. So I applied for that on the off chance, and I got the job. And I had no idea how to program. And my first thing they tasked me with was to write a game for the Sinclair QL. And I think I wrote this hangman game, which had 10 words as the sort of you could select and guess. And I think it probably took me about 2 weeks. I had no idea what I was doing. But anyway, and then I started writing reviews. But they went into liquidation less than 6 weeks after I joined. I actually did get a redundancy payment, which I used to buy a sewing machine. No idea why I did that, because I didn't make anything. And then I started looking again, and that's when I got a job with Dennis Publishing. But when I joined, it was Bunch Books, and I think they only had about 45, 50 employees maximum. They were based on Rathbone Place in an old furrier shop, which had been owned by Ringo Starr, I believe. So the story went. Yeah, and I applied for production editor of a magazine called Your 64. Got the job. My first week, I went in there on my starting day, sort of in my kind of, been out of university a year. And I think I was like, my first year, I was just like unemployed, trying to get into sort of get a break into the world of media. My first day in, I got there with my little suit on, feeling very nervous. And there was a bit of scuffling behind reception. Oh, we just got to go and find the guy called Perry Neville, who'd actually hired me. And then they came back after what felt like ages and said, "Can you come back next week? We haven't fired the guy you're taking over from yet." And I was like, "Oh, okay. Oh, don't worry, we'll pay you. Kind of just going, if you've got a Commodore, which I did have, just sort of, sort of practice on it and play about on it a bit and come back in a week." So that was my introduction to journalism, editing, and then publishing.
Was it a red flag, do you think?
Uh no, I was just a bit, oh, is this what it's like when you go to work? And Bunch Books, as it was then, was very different to when I left 8 years later. It was a completely different organization. I joined in 1984-5, and the world was a totally different place as well. And magazines were much more staid, I would have said. I mean, your 64 and YS, which was your Sinclair, were a lot more boring. There was a lot of programming stuff in there. All the magazines were done in a traditional way, so it was all sort of cut and paste. So you'd be sending off proofs to a repro house for them to lay it out, and you get it back, and then it'd go to the art studio, and they'd literally be cutting up the corrections. So they hated you doing corrections because they had to do it all by hand, then send it back, get it retypeset. No email. Just shows how old I am. No emails, no internet, no mobile phones.
Yeah, I remember the old ones, the old magazines. Every cover had like a close up of a computer keyboard. and
Yeah,
there's just lots and lots of pages of programming, software and things to type in, wasn't there? And really, really old 60s illustrations as well for some reason that they're just sort of forced in there.
yeah.
Uh, remind me, did you work on your Spectrum or did you go straight on to your Sinclair?
No, it started as Your Spectrum. I was trying to think actually what the title was then. Yeah, it was Your Spectrum when I joined. And a guy called Peter Shaw was there. He used to do sort of all the sort of pokes and stuff to get into, sort of crack games and stuff. A lot of Cody type stuff.
Hmm.
There were more hardware reviews then as well. So it was kind of making that transition at that point from trying to be a bit of a grown-up personal computer, to actually it's really good. And it's when I think the ZX Spectrum came on the scene with the rubber keyboard and stuff, that that's when it moved into that games arena.
Yeah. So was it it must have been a conscious decision then to move it more towards sort of a youth theme rather than a sort of a more mature theme?
Yeah, I mean, they moved. They had a rebrand, obviously, from Your Spectrum to YS to make it a bit more kind of, I suppose, resonate a little bit more with the audience.
Hmm.
We were looking at youth magazines in general. So magazines like Smash Hits, Just 17, those sorts of magazines. And kind of thinking, actually, we started to think more about the audience, looking at how the industry was going. There were more games being published. So it was a conscious decision to kind of rebrand it and also kind of move where its main focus was. And you can see that if you look at sort of the issues from the beginning, it moved more and more towards games.
Yeah, I like the way that 'cause I was a reader myself, so I like the way that not only did you have like little pictures of yourselves, little caricatures of yourself, you referenced each other in not interviews, sorry, in reviews as well, didn't you? So you made it sort of, you could identify the people that were writing it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, again, that was very much a deliberate, well, partly because we all really did genuinely get on as a team. I don't think I've worked anywhere where I have laughed so much. We were always, in fits. We had some very, very talented writers who were also very funny. So, people like Marcus Bertman, Duncan MacDonald, Phil South, David McCandless, lots of people that were really quite amusing. And they used to just all sort of like, kind of feed off each other. There was always a lot of banter in the office. And we wanted to actually create like a community feel in the magazine. So people felt we were actually talking to them, that there was personality. So it was really important to me when I became editor to have personality in the magazine. So people, rather than it being third person and, actually, so people could actually, and then that's why we have pictures, because I know a lot of them were cartoons, obviously, but people get a sense of who those personas were, and
Hmm.
they could relate them.
Hmm. How did you divvy up the reviews for people? Did you find that certain people preferred certain games to review?
Yeah, I mean, you get people at like a certain genre. So there was a guy, I've forgotten his surname now, Steve. Can't remember his surname, but he used to do a lot of the adventure games, especially at the beginning. And he was when you used to type in, you type in all your responses to really early adventure games. Nobody else wanted to do those because you had to do so much typing. It was boring. Um, it was better when they got more sort of interactive in the sort of like the Prince of Persia and Mist and all that stuff. Um, and there were others that liked more shoot 'em ups, and they were better at the shoot 'em ups. Others like puzzle games, but by and large, it was kind of like who was around. All right, here's a bundle of games. You go and review all those games. And sometimes people would say, "Oh, I want to review that," and they were particularly interested in reviewing a game.
Yeah. How did it work with all the freelancers? Because you had people like Mike Gerard that were working externally. Did they just sort of wandering like every week, or how did it work?
Yeah, yeah. So Mike Gerald, he was Ventures, and yeah, basically we would say, "Oh, well, we've got these things in. What's coming up in the next month? What adventure games are coming up?" yeah, and we would just say to him, well, we've got X number of games for you to review. We'd either post them out to him or he'd come in and collect them. I think with Mike, mostly we posted them out.
Hmm. You know, what was the first on the list?
Oh gosh, I don't think we were that organised in those days. I think we just pitched up and hoped we hadn't got a hangover. We used to have, I mean, the magazine was structured in the sense that we'd always have an editorial meeting at the beginning of the schedule. You're starting with, I mean, one of the things that's great about magazines and books to a certain extent, you're starting with nothing. You've just got blank pages, and that's just both really frightening but really empowering. And it's, you know, you think, right, what are we going to do? So we'd have an editorial sort of prepping meeting, decide what features we were going to do, what games were coming up. You know, quite a lot of the time the publishers might say they had certain releases coming out and then they wouldn't appear, or you'd have like a special, you know, they were doing the sort of previews. You'd think you'd had a preview, you know, like a real sort of coup, and you were going to put it on the cover. I can remember the Young Ones. That was one where we, you know, we thought, well, that's great. I think it was the second issue. We had a free tape on the cover, and we were really waiting for that game. And we thought we had a real coup that we had it. And it was delayed and delayed. And when we finally got it, it was so bad. But we'd kind of already committed, because it just was nowhere near in a position to review it. So yeah, and we used to kind of think of, you know, what can we do this month? And I tried to include things that weren't just games, because I felt that the audience readers they weren't just interested in games. So that's why we do things occasionally like go off to Alton Towers for the day, take loads of photos, and we did those photo love stories as well. So we drew a lot of inspiration from other teenage magazines.
Yeah. Your marking system changed over time as well, didn't it? So you had I've got just refer to my notes. So there was a joystick jewelry, and then it changed to a sort of a more individual marking system, didn't it? Was that? Did you have a lot of people just saying it just wasn't working out, or was it just more, you know, the demographic of getting everybody to play the same game or something like that?
I've have got to be honest, you're talking 30 years ago. I have no idea. I can't remember. I can remember joystick jewelry. May have just been, you know, we just decided it was time for a change, and we'd take a different approach to marking games. And we try to sort of keep things always developing, not staying the same. So may have just decided time for a change. Let's do something different. There were lots of arguments in the office, of course, about, you know, oh, you rated that. God, that's like, you know, rubbish game. As it is now, what one person likes, somebody else doesn't like.
Yeah. Okay. So, in terms of covers, did you get a lot of people? Because I know you had that. You had a few special editions, didn't you, where you could use the box artwork from companies. Was it quite a lot of competition to get their games on the cover? In terms of yeah.
Yeah, yes. I mean, the cover was really important. The cover's what sells you on a newsstand. You know, there were a lot of games magazines around at that time. So, you know, we got criticism for some of the covers. You know, was it Psycho Pig UXB? I remember as one of them. I remember the Vixen cover, and that was actually Felix was on Channel 4 program, and I can't remember what the program was about, but I think it was about sexism or something. And they were really criticising the Vixen cover, which was taken from the poster of the game. And I remember him saying, "Oh, have you know the editor of that magazine's a woman?" And thinking about it now, I think the time then was quite different. Would I put the same things on the cover again now? I'm not sure that I would. But were they being marketed to the audience? Yes. Were they successful? Yeah, I mean, they were successful. We also did a cover where we got readers to, it was the Harrison Ford one. I think it must have been Raiders of the Lost Ark. We got them to submit cover illustrations, and we used one. That was really, really popular. Usually their covers were based on what we thought would be marketable, appeal to the audience, and had a good, solid game to back it up behind it.
Well, you had your own column as well, the sort of agony aunt sort of type thing, didn't you? So obviously the question is, there was a lot of teenage boys that read that magazine. Did you get any sort of really strange letters coming in?
Yes, I certainly did. I can remember receiving. Yeah, I used to get letters, addressed to Teaser all the time. I remember getting one with a plastic bag of toenail or fingernail clippings.
Right.
Another one with hair. Yeah, there was some quite sort of dodgy contents. Quite a few pressing undying love. I can remember going to some shows and being quite surprised and quite shocked, where people would be coming up and say, "Can you sign my arm? Can you sign my T-shirt?" Thinking,
Yeah.
why do you want me to sign your T-shirt or program? Yeah, so because yeah, that was quite a surprise. Yeah, but most of them were just light-hearted letters generally to the magazine. I think all the staff got, you know, Berkman used to get letters, Snouty would get letters.
Hmm. But when I worked in games, I worked in games. I used to be a game developer, right? So, and there was all these rumors that went around it. It's mainly the very early days of magazines, so of people like publishers threatening to pull advertising if they got like a bad review or something like that. Did that ever happen to your magazines?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did. We would have conversations with advertisers if they knew we were going to give them not a great review.
Mhm.
It was really important for the integrity of a magazine that you have to stick with that. So yeah, and it was always tension between editorial and the advertising team, because they'd be saying, "Oh, well, I don't want to lose. We're going to lose their sort of, And it might have been not just one ad; it might have been a booking of 10, say. But you can't lose editorial integrity, because once you do that,
Mm.
your audience isn't going to believe they're not going to trust you anymore, and it's really important they trust you. And I think part of what made YS the magazine it was
Mm.
because we didn't bow to that pressure, even though it was difficult for the ad team sometimes.
Yeah.
When you're number one, it probably is a little bit easier maybe to do that. The ad revenues were good, but they weren't fantastic at that point in time. The industry was really in its infancy, and it wasn't, worth the amount of money it is now.
Yeah.
But it was still, could be a really sort of quite a blow if a publishing house did pull their advertising. And it did happen. It did happen occasionally, yeah. I'm not naming names.
No, I wouldn't put you in that position. Speaking of the cover tapes again, I mean, they must have been a nightmare to put together because, again, like you said before, if a game wasn't ready, you know what you're going to do. So, did you have a special person that had to do all that, had to put all that together?
Yeah, me.
Yeah.
It was part of the promotional. I would say, yeah, they were difficult to get together, to put together. I can remember Batty. I think Kevin Cox was publisher then, or publisher editor. I can remember that was quite a coup when we got that. Then we did a deal with Ocean, where they would often supply games. But we just had to, and it got very competitive at the beginning. YS was one of the first. In fact, I think it was the first magazine to put a cover tape on there, and it was always a complete game. So that was our kind of selling point, that you got a complete game. As time went on, I think that got more difficult because there were more people all bidding to try and get games. You then had to get the games to a time frame, and you had to have, obviously, especially when there were tapes, the tapes had to be all reproduced at sort of a lot, sort of in big numbers, sort of 80, 90, 100,000. That took time. So yeah, it was always quite hairy whether you were actually going to get the tape ready to get on the cover. And sometimes it might go without something that you hope to have on it, or you might have a last minute change.
Yeah. What's the story behind Advanced Lawnmower Simulator?
That was Duncan MacDonald. Yeah, he's sadly not with us anymore, and I was gutted when I heard that. He was one of the most talented writers I've ever worked with. Most people wouldn't have given him a job. at all. I mean, he didn't work to normal, what you call office hours. I mean, we didn't really stick to office hours, but most people were in by 10 o'clock and whatever. And we worked really, really late, sometimes till the early hours in the morning. But Duncan, he drove a camper around. He was often on a bender somewhere. I don't know what he was up to. And he sometimes wouldn't appear till 3 o'clock. So he was quite unreliable, but it was so worth it because he did deliver. I mean, you might be thinking, oh, is he actually going to turn up? Oh, we've got a deadline for this game. And so it was quite stressful. But on the other hand, he usually did deliver. It was rare that he would let anybody down, even if he was there till 4, 5, 6 in the morning doing it. And he was just so talented, and he was very, very funny, and in a very sort of self-deprecating way. And I think we were just chatting in the office one day, and I don't know, he was messing around whether he'd seen something, I think, about a lawnmower. I can't remember if this came first or second, but it was about a lawnmower museum in Liverpool. I think which is still in existence. And anyway, he just I don't know, he just started piddling around and then showed us this lawnmower simulator, and we all fell about with laughter. And then from there, I think, yeah, we sort of did a review of it, and then we decided it'd be great to have on the cover. And it obviously worked because people still talk about it.
Yeah, similar ideas turned up in proper games as well later on. Yeah, there's a couple of games where you could actually just find a lawnmower and just push it around. I think it was in Rebel Star Raiders. That was one of the games. It was obviously a tribute, so I like that. I saw that. I found that. So in 1990, it was sold to Future Publishing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So how did that affect everything? Did you have to move?
No, I was offered by Future to move. So just before that, I think it went quite comic-y, which was a move I didn't agree with. I thought at the time it should have been closed because I felt it had had its time. But Felix Dennis, the owner of Dennis Publishing, didn't agree. So it went quite comic-y, and that didn't really, it didn't improve sales. Things had moved on. You had consoles by then. So Future bought it, and yeah, a number of the staff did go with it, and I could have gone down with it, working with Kevin Cox, who'd gone down there a few years before, who was on Your Sinclair when I joined. But I was living in London, enjoying London, wasn't really ready to move to Bath. So I decided to do that. And also at that point, I think we'd also, Zero was either launched or in planning stages. So yeah, no, I didn't go down there. I worked on Your Sinclair, then I launched Zero. So we wanted to do a magazine with a little bit more sophisticated, with a real departure from that sort of comic-y feel. Something a little bit more grown up, I suppose. And that was a multi-format magazine. And I wanted to launch a PC games magazine probably 2 or 3 years before it launched. But again, the board at Dennis and Felix and others did not think anybody would buy a PC games magazine, and that the PC wasn't for games. And the very notion that we might put a disc on the front was just, no way. So it took that long. It took 2 or 3 years to actually get it past the board. I think when we started to see games advertising in Computer Shopper magazine, that was a big Dennis magazine, I think they began to realise, actually people were playing games with PCs, and obviously you could have them spec'd for games playing. So but at the same time, I was made publisher, so I was publisher of Zero and Your Sinclair. By the time PC Zone was launched, I was a publishing director, so I was on the board at that point, and I was also responsible for Game Zone, Sega Zone, Nintendo Zone when Game Zone split, a magazine called 90 Minutes, which was a weekly football magazine.
I remember that, yeah.
and also Dennis One Shots, and they put out pop magazines, WWF magazine, lots of little one shots basically. Yeah, and I wanted to also pitch for the Sony PlayStation magazine, and when that came up for several people to pitch for, and at that particular time, so it would have been what, 1991, 1992, something like that, games were still not seen as mainstream entertainment. So although I'd be sitting on the board saying, oh, they're going to be as big as films, it's going to be as big as music, nobody else had that view, because they didn't make the sort of money that, as a division, the games division and One Shots didn't make the same sort of money as Shopper and Microscope. Mac User at that point, obviously he had Mac User that was doing very, very well, and I just don't think the board had that sort of foresight to think actually this might grow. And to be fair to them, maybe at the time it didn't appear like it would do.
Right.
So I wanted to get into more consumer focused magazines rather than straight computer magazines.
Yeah.
So I kind of, that's probably around the time that I left Dennis and came out of the games industry, which I really do regret now. I wish I'd stayed in the games industry and just gone elsewhere. I was offered a job by the BBC working on their in their teenage division, but I didn't take that either because that was a change from publishing director to assistant publisher, and I didn't feel that was a good career move. With hindsight, it might have been, but you never know, do you?
You never know.
You never know. So I did the first issue of PC Zone and launched it, and then Paul Lakin was editor.
Right. How do you think games have changed since those early days? I mean, obviously they've come on leaps and bounds, haven't they?
Oh God, I mean, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, it's so different. There's a lot to be said for like a basic Tetris type game. I loved playing Prince of Persia. Absolutely loved that. Absolutely addicted to that. I used to sit in the office when everyone else would be in the office as well, playing games till God knows what time, thinking I must leave, I must get my train, and the next thing you know, it's like 1 o'clock in the morning and you're still playing games. So I really like that. And I like the Mario sort of games. I now see games, my son's a big, well, both, I've got 4 children, but my oldest son and my next one down, they're both big games players. My youngest son, and he often says to me, Mum, why did you leave the games industry? I could be like all these games and blah blah blah. But so when I try and play over the years, I've said, oh, I can play games. So I try to play games like Call of Duty and stuff. It's just what do you do? There's just too many controls, and I can't do it. I could do the really sort of straightforward ones. I used to quite like the Wii. I can do that.
I'm pretty much the same. I'm terrible at playing games these days. I just don't even.
I mean, I'm just quite shocked at they look so real. They look like you're in a film. I mean, the CGI and the graphics are just stunning. But sometimes there's a balance, isn't there, between sometimes that sort of down and dirty type game can be more addictive and more playable. And I can't really articulate why, but it just is. But yeah, I mean, it's a different kettle of fish now, and you can see that what the games industry is worth, billions, isn't it?
I asked Phil about a good question to ask you, and he said, ask her to tell you the behind-the-scenes story of getting me and Marcus in drag for our pantomime.
Oh, is that Phil? Phil said that?
Yeah.
I can't remember the behind-the-scenes story. All I remember is I decided, we wanted to do a photo shoot. We wanted to have it themed for Christmas, so we decided we'd all get dressed up. And obviously, it was obvious that they should be the Ugly Sisters. There wasn't really any question about it. I don't know what Phil's talking about, the behind-the-scenes story. I mean, and they made a beautiful pair of Ugly Sisters. So I think, we used to have a lot of fun. I mean, they probably didn't want to do it at all, but I don't think I wanted to dress up as Marjorie Proops for my agony column, but we just did it. It was just good fun, and everyone just took the mickey out of each other, but in a nice, in a nice, fun way.
Well, you're still writing a lot of books, aren't you, about like popular culture and that sort of thing? Ones based around Steps and the Spice Girls and so on. Have you got still a big love for that sort of era? The sort of 80s and 90s.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't think I kind of look back on that time, and I don't think it can be. It was so different. I mean, computers were at the forefront. The whole way we work, digital, internet, again, that massive change was all happening then. So the time I was at work, we got email, then we got the internet, we got mobile phones, but they were still like big, chunky things. I don't think I got my first Apple iPhone. I can't remember, probably about 1980s, 1990 something. So it was was no social media when I was working in publishing. And we'd go out for lunch. I can remember a lot of the PR sort of things that we did. I mean, I did some amazing things. I went on Concorde around the Bay of Biscay. I think that was with US Gold for the launch of the game. Cannot remember what it was. We went with Microprose for a launch of a simulator to Baltimore and Washington. I mean, that was an amazing trip. Several boat journeys down the Thames for sort of breakfast with box fizz, and going out and drinking at lunchtime and after work every night was just normal.
Yeah.
Not very healthy at all, but that was normal. And then suddenly it changed with the sort of advent of Perrier in about 1991. So yeah, I do look back very fondly at the 80s and 90s for a number of reasons. We had a launch. I think it was it might have been an anniversary of your Sinclair at one point, and we had a party on a boat on the Thames. We invited Sir Clive Sinclair, and it had a theme of some sort of dress up. I can't remember what. And we'd probably been to the pub before we even went to the boat. And I can remember there was this massive big jetty, and we were on the boat thinking, is he actually going to come? Is he going to arrive? And I was sort of like waiting, hoping, and then I saw him right down the end walking towards us. And I think he took one look at us, and he was completely on his own. He was dressed in a suit, a grey suit. I can remember it vividly. I think he must have taken one look at us and thought, I don't think so. And he turned around and walked away. So we never did get our sort of prize guest at our party. That was quite funny, and I do remember that.
Brilliant. Well, thanks again, Teresa. And I'll let you
know
when it's online. Thank you.
Okay.